Good afternoon and welcome. Thanks for joining us. If you join us online or here in the studio as well, we have a great audience for this discussion. Our topic today is packaging and packaging waste regulation. How can we make it work? If you're joining us online, you'll see information in just a second. For Twitter, you can use hashtag EA Debates. We encourage you to send questions, there we go, on Slido, hashtag packaging. The studio audience as well, if you can send your questions using hashtag packaging on Slido, we'll be bringing those questions to the panel throughout the course of the discussion, not just at the end. So you can get started on that right now, and we'll bring our panel the questions very soon. So it's open Slido, use the QR code there, just scan it, and hashtag packaging. So let's talk about in November 2022, the European Commission proposed revising the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive with the objective of reducing the negative environmental impacts of packaging and packaging waste while also improving the functioning of the internal market. This revision aims to prevent the generation of packaging waste, reduce its quantity and promote reuse and refill. It also seeks to ensure that all packaging on the EU market will be recyclable in an economically viable way by 2030, while increasing the use of recycled plastics in packaging. One of the measures proposed is focused on targets for packaging waste reduction at the member state level and mandatory reuse targets for economic operators for selected packaging groups. Some stakeholders say there are aspects of the proposed revision requiring further development to ensure effective implementation. Joining us to discuss the proposed revision to the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, we have with us Aurel Chobano, who's the Director of Circular Economy at DG Environment, the European Commission. Thank you for joining us today. Elena Mastantuono, a member of the Employers Group at the European Economic and Social Committee. Marco Musso is the Policy Officer on Fiscal Reform for Circular Economy and Carbon Neutrality at EEB, it was the European Environmental Bureau. Stephen Russell, Director General of ANEC, and Eleni Despoto, Director General of FEFCO. Thanks so much for joining us. We also had expected to have Niels Torvalds, a member of the European Parliament, with us today. He wasn't able to join us, but he has sent us this short video clip.
Hello, I have a lot of questions here. I probably don't know all the answers, even if that would be wonderful, of course. Can recycling solve all the problems? No. What's the practical and policy differences between recycling and reusing packaging? That's a very complicated question. Why? Well, it's a question of materials. It's a question of the goods. It's a question of transport. And it's a question of the transport or the processes in the whole chain. So there are no easy answers, and that's probably the most problematic thing we have here. Because if you then go into the impact assessment, you probably love it, but the impact assessment doesn't solve the issues. There's a lot of questions, and then you have some really bad answers in the impact assessment. So therefore, what we from the very beginning started to think of, would it be better to sort of shrink the proposal, sort of take away things that has to do with upstreams production chains, and then you have the similar problem in the downstream production chains, so that you should sort of make something which is more a solution on the principal stage or the principal level. And then, and that's probably the real point, then we should trust the industry. If you don't trust the industry, if the system doesn't trust you, then you will have a lot of different regulations and demands which you can't actually meet. So trust, I think, has from the very beginning been the centerpiece in any functioning society. So if there is trust that you are doing as well as you can, and that you take into account the different circumstances you have in different countries and in different parts of the industries, then we might be able to find a solution which is actually then working in practice, which is what we should be doing. If we don't do things for the practice, reducing for something for sort of a construction we have here in our head, then we might be on the wrong track, and I would like to be there. So I hope you find solutions in your practical life, and I hope the best for you. Thanks.
Thanks to Niels Torvand for that. I notice there's a magician in the background. I don't think this issue is quite as complex, requiring magic, but let's hear from each of our panelists. Now, 60 seconds for your opening remarks. Aurel, you can kick off.
Yeah, I hope that MEP Torvalds, who wished us success, will be part of the solution. Now, the European Commission has brought forward this legislative proposal for two major reasons. Because we have seen over the past 10-15 years a decoupling between economic growth and the generation of waste, packaging and packaging waste, with these having a steeper increase than the economic or geographic development in Europe, and this is unacceptable. 40% of the plastics and 50% of the paper in the EU are used for packaging, exerting immense pressure on our limited natural resources. And secondly, we have seen a failure of the efficiency of the directive adopted in 1994 on packaging and packaging waste, with economic operators across sectors and across the European Union facing raising obstacles between member states in the free circulation of packaging and of packaging waste. So we needed to address these issues, and we have addressed them in a comprehensive approach, starting with the design for recycling, with the prevention of waste, with packaging minimization, recycling, reuse. I would like to say that even if for some sectors of the industry, or some economic operators rather, some of these measures are controversial, we need to look at the global effectiveness and capacity to deliver results, economic results and environmental results, and continue to look in a holistic way to these aspects. And I would like to say that most, if not all, almost all of the solutions, regulatory solutions brought forward in this legislative proposal are inspired from practice. They exist in operation in one or more member states currently, so they are tested in practice and they deliver results. So we should not upset this. There is room for fine-tuning, but not for disruption, segmentation, taking out the upstream aspects, or leaving this proposal operate only at the level or incorporate only principles. One of the worst things which could happen is to have a regulation which is only based on major principles and without clarity as to the operational rules. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Aurel. Elena.
Thank you very much. I will try to fit into 60 seconds. I will have 4 introductory remarks. So with the economic growth, we consume more, we're doing better, but we also produce more waste. And I think it's correct to think about how to reduce the packaging waste and actually how to prevent it. But I think that all actors on the market should be responsible for doing so. Not only businesses, it should not lie on the shoulders of businesses. Me as a consumer, I should think how to reduce the packaging waste. The second thing is the way how we should reduce the packaging waste should be sorted out locally. I think that member states should decide which way they want to go, because it doesn't make sense if I need to refill a product that I transport it to the other side of the country or to another country. We have to look at the entire environmental footprint because, as I said, it doesn't make sense. Third thing is that the businesses need certainty and predictability. If they don't have concrete criteria, if the targets are changing constantly, of course, we will lose the momentum for investments and for innovation. So I don't think it's a good way of approaching the regulation with this trial and error method, saying, okay, look, we suggest this, but if it doesn't work in the future, we might change it. So it's not a good way how to regulate. Fourth thing is that the health of consumers should not prevail the environmental aspects. Some materials cannot be recycled indefinitely or reused indefinitely, and we can run a risk of contamination of or release of some substances that are harmful to human beings. So for this we need deeper analysis, and I think it was said also the impact assessment should really bring the answer to this, but it didn't. And I think we have to measure twice, cut once.
Thank you. Marco.
Thank you. So indeed, packaging waste is on the rise, and as we all know, it's actually growing faster than our GDP growth. So kind of showing that we are not on the right path. We are actually becoming increasingly wasteful in the way we transport and handle and consume our product. And as also we all know, it's projected to grow by another 20% only over the next 7 years, in case we don't actually intervene in a serious and credible way. Also, perhaps just to set the scene, we have to acknowledge that this rapid rise is driven by our addiction to disposable throwaway packaging solution. And to tackle this uncontrolled growth of packaging waste and also the related environmental impacts, which have to do with emissions, with resource use, with water, pollution, also biodiversity loss, we actually cannot and must not ignore the upstream solutions. So this means that we need effective rules at EU levels to prevent the production and consumption of packaging as much as possible wherever this is possible. And to get practical, as we've been invited to do, this means measures, binding measures in the packaging and packaging waste regulation to prevent excessive and avoidable packaging and to scale up well-designed reuse systems. Packaging waste is also a crisis of overconsumption and overexploitation of resources, which are too often inefficiently used and put into short-lived throwaway application. As we've heard, the packaging sector is one of the main users of virgin materials in the EU. But also we know that our consumption and our production habits are clearly exceeding the planetary boundaries already today, and this is true for all materials. This makes it urgent for the packaging waste regulation to actually address resource use, resource consumption for all the packaging materials. It's also important when revising the EU packaging rules to recognize that all the packaging materials come with their respective impacts. And this is why it's so important that this law doesn't just aim to drive simple material substitution, for example, from single-use plastics to single-use paper-based application, but actually sets Europe and also all our value chain in the way of a genuine circular economy. So focusing on prevention and reuse as a way to achieve this packaging waste prevention. I think I will leave it at this for now.
Thank you, Mark.
And thank you. I look forward to the discussion.
Yes. Stephen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I think for the consumer, the 1994 directive has disappointed. What we now need is an effective regulation for the good of society and for the environment, and one in particular that addresses the chemicals in packaging waste, because that's something on which the proposal is quite silent for the moment. A recent report, I think in April, by the journalists that investigate Europe, showed the average European consumer produces 35 kilograms in plastic packaging waste annually and alone. That's without any other type of packaging waste. Much of this ends up in landfills or incinerators, and if we continue as we are, we will see a further 19% increase in overall packaging waste by 2030 and a 46% increase in plastic packaging waste. Now, not only do plastics contain carcinogenic components from the oil and gas used to make them, but their very manufacture and disposal contributes to climate change. If we continue as we are, then the development and disposal of plastic packaging waste will contribute to 15% of global CO2 emissions by 2050. Consumers want change. As I said at the beginning, the directive has disappointed. A survey for our big sister organisation, BEUC, showed 4 in 5 consumers are concerned at the impact of food packaging waste on their environment, while 9 out of 10 wanted strict rules to actually stop such impacts. We need this regulation, and we need it to be ambitious. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Eleni.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for being here. I'm delighted to have this discussion this afternoon with you and all the participants. I represent FEFCO. For those who do not know FEFCO, we do represent the corrugated cardboard packaging manufacturers, the European ones, and of course we are very much concerned, we are following intensively the PPWR revision. I would like to be clear for the beginning that we do support the objectives of the PPWR because we believe that it has the potential to bring packaging waste in certain and sustainability further beyond to a next level. And we do support, of course, and we welcome the European Commission proposal. So needless to say that packaging has a role, a functionality to protect goods and then to store and sell them. And speaking about corrugated cardboard that I represent, this is a highly sustainable product which already embedded in a circular economy fully. So there is already a very well-established recycling system in Europe, which enables, in fact, one of the highest recycling rates. Notably, in some cases, we reach more than 90% of recycling rates of the corrugated cardboard packaging, and with recycled content, 89%. So here, I would like, if you allow me, to react a bit on what has been said by Mr. Dordea and Mr. Musso regarding natural resources, that we use natural resources for our packaging. In fact, when you have 89% of recycled content, then you need only 11% to fulfill from fresh or new fibers in order to produce a new packaging. So this comes again and again in a cycle, and then you reuse your fibers again and again. So the argument that we use natural resources, yes, we come from a renewable source, certainly, but we don't use the natural resources for the entire packaging content. So, of course, we're fully aware about the waste hierarchy and putting preparation for use higher than recycling. However, we believe that there is a bias in the proposal putting somehow reuse better in any ways and always. So to us, reduce, reuse, and recycling are complementary. They go hand in hand, and we believe that they have their value and their position in this regulation. Just wanted to aware you that despite the good intentions, there might be some unintended consequences, because again, Mr. Dordea mentioned already about tested packaging methods, reusable packaging methods. We have tried to find in certain areas, as for instance for large appliances, but we have not found much. So it will be a nice discussion that we will have here. I would be short here just to let you know that our organization, our companies are really happy to engage with all stakeholders, with policymakers, really to make a PPWR successful for packaging and achieve its aims. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eleni. Stephen, it's clear that there's no one solution to this. Recycling alone is not going to solve the waste crisis, but what's the difference from your perspective on recycling and reusing packaging? What are the different issues that we're dealing with here?
Well, we don't really want to make a distinction between the two. We support the prioritization of reuse systems over single-use packaging, but only where it's sensible for consumers and the environment, and where one, convenience, hygiene and safety can be guaranteed, and two, the environmental impacts in the life cycle are lower than for single-use packaging. But what we really want to see in the proposal is a requirement that such reusable packaging is designed for durability and recyclability.
Okay, and how practical is that? Eleni?
As far as cardboard is concerned, we're fully aligned. I mean, our product is fully recycled. In some cases, we may reach even 100% of recycling rates. So I would be really aligned with a colleague here.
All right, so cardboard's one side. Where do we have the fault lines when it comes to recycling and reusability then?
Yeah, I would like to comment in response to what Mrs. Despotou said. We don't believe, I mean, we are, the package of solutions that we brought forward is relying more than in the past on reuse and refill. But otherwise, we feel that the mix of measures that we are proposing is fairly balanced. We totally agree also with Annick that we need to look at the carbon footprint and in a life cycle approach, and maybe there is room for improvement in some areas for some sectors when it comes to reuse. Of course, when one think about the fast food sector, probably what is essential is about the serving on the spot. So we are engaging with the member states and with European Parliament to fine-tune this, and we are exchanging also with the industry, including HoReCa, in order to better calibrate this. But I would like to make a few points related to what I've heard very briefly. Trust the industry, somebody said. I think it was MEP Torvalds. Absolutely. And one of the engines or the reasons for this proposal is to help the industry draw the maximum of benefits from the single market. Trust, but verify, as some US president in a completely different context has put it. Verify, establish methods in order to measure the performance and to secure the comparability. So trust, but verify. One comment about the mandatory recycled content. We believe that this is one of the most beneficial measures that this legislative proposal brings forward. It puts a price tag on recyclability and triggers even further or fuels the business interest in investing in this. We are aware that a number of collateral or complementary improvements need to take place, a better selective collection of waste in the member states in order to increase the amount of recyclates which should feed into the fulfilling of the obligation related to mandatory recycled content. We are committed to work with this, and we would like on this, and we would like to associate also the industry in bilateral dialogues with member states in the period following the adoption of the packaging regulation in order to create the real working conditions on the ground even before we come with delegated and implementing acts under the regulation, in order to make sure that the system functions well, that there is a liquidity of the secondary raw material markets, and the degree of collection is significant. Health of consumers has been mentioned here. Often this is weaponized as a criticism against the regulation. We would like to reassure everyone, consumers and industry alike, and non-governmental organizations, of course, but we hear this less from their side, that we work hand in hand with the colleagues in charge with the regulation dealing with food packaging material in order to make sure that requirements which are applicable to packaging protect the consumer. The Commission will never authorize in the future any form of packaging if the conditions will not be met on a constant basis, on a long-term basis, in order to protect the health of the consumers. And I will stop here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Elena, do you see that the packaging waste regulation has the capacity to fit for all sectors, or is there going to be more legislation required in addition to this?
So certainly I don't like if there is more regulation and more regulation. As I said at the beginning, we need some predictability for businesses. But if you allow me, I would like just to respond for this, because you mentioned the criteria for the recyclability, and I think that this is what we're still missing.
Design for recycling.
Exactly. Yeah. So as a business representative, and I mentioned it at the beginning, if you don't know what will be the concrete criteria, in the future, it's a bit difficult because we lose this momentum. We have to wait for investing in new processes. So this is a bit the weak point, that these delegated and implementing acts are coming after the regulation is adopted. So it actually is not good for predictability for businesses. And then another thing, the distinction between recycling and reusing. Of course, the reuse is in the waste management hierarchy higher, but as I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes it doesn't make sense to transport it very far. It makes sense to recycle it at the spot. So as other colleagues mentioned, I think it should be a mixture of methods, of processes we use. And if it fits for everything, no, certainly not. It's a challenge for regulation to look at all sectors, at all materials and at all goods. And I think the member of the European Parliament highlights this challenge as well.
Well, he was fairly critical of the impact assessment. What are your issues with the impact assessment, Elena?
So as I said, we are still missing the impact on consumers' health.
Okay. Just that part. Okay.
And environment, to take into account the entire carbon footprint on the economy.
Okay. Let me go to Marco first. Marco.
Yeah, no, there has been many interesting points, so please feel free to get back to me if I forget anything. But maybe one rapid but important, also from our perspective and perspective of environmental organization, we think chemicals, the presence of chemicals in packaging and substance of concern is an area that is not sufficiently addressed. This is of course valid for single use and for reuse. We are aware of issues particularly worrying in relation to paper-based food packaging. So this is certainly an area where we would welcome clarity and also regulatory actions already in the regulation. And I want to go back to a point about the sustainability of packaging. So we would caution to be, that is a little bit more complex, to talk about sustainability of a packaging without looking at volumes and the consumption. And this is particularly important for packaging that has claims about renewability. We cannot ignore the material reality. So the renewability is unavoidably linked to the stock. And we do know that in the case of forest, I'm taking forest because it's been introduced, but not to bash on this material, but we do know about the pressures on the forest, both in Europe and also in the global south. So this is why we would not deny the importance of achieving very good collection, very good recycling rate, very good recycled content incorporation, but it would be, we think, dangerous and blind to ignore the upstream, to ignore the volumes. And paper-based packaging has been growing faster than any of the other materials. We cannot ignore the pressure that this exerts on forest and on water and on the chemicals used for the production and also for the recycling. So this is the reason why we think it's interesting to talk reuse. We don't think it's a simple solution, and we certainly are interested in reuse systems that are well designed and that bring environmental benefits. Something that it's maybe obvious is that we don't really think that studies, LCA studies, sponsored and promoted by the industry, by the interested industry, provide a sufficiently robust basis for political decision making. And this is why we think it's surprising that we see more and more of this industry study that come at the same time at criticism of the impact assessment. As environmental NGOs, we are very used to criticize Commission impact assessment. But we have to recognize that there is more solidity and more different sources looked at in the Commission impact assessment than in industry study paid by the industry that is being regulated. So this is why we would rather be interested, and it's a bit of the regret that we have over this negotiation, that we had to talk about reuse or not, and facing a lot of denial rather than reuse how. And how we design them in such a way that we do actually make sure the rotations are there, the logistics is optimized, and the business can do it in practice.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to respond to that?
Yes, a lot of points. So I would, first of all, I would like to say that despite the nitty-gritty details and the complexity of the proposal, the European Commission has proposed a quite balanced document. However, as for the impact assessment, our regret is that we cannot really have access to data, to assumptions. For us, it's a black box. And when somebody is allowed to make a policy recommendation that will impact industry and economies, we believe that at least this kind of transparency is essential. So this is the main criticism that we are having for the impact assessment. I come back to the volumes that you referred to about paper and board. Just mentioning, yes, indeed, and you recall certainly in the impact assessment the graph with the volumes of waste, of course without any consideration of the recycling rate, and without considering that what is considered as waste, it's valuable raw material for our industry. Because when you see folded boxes in the pavements to expect collection, you know that our companies are buying those materials from the municipalities. They are paying to buy them. So for us, it's not waste at all. It's valuable raw material, and it's not something that we're just putting a label on this. I mean, it is. And it has a value and a price. So I agree with you on good collection, good recycling. There are certainly ways that we can always improve, notably collection. In some member states, for instance, you have very high collection rates and others not. So certainly there is a way to go there. I would like also to react on the studies you mentioned by the industry. So certainly industry, as everybody, as you as well, make studies. In our case, at least, we have tried to be as transparent as possible, making studies based on public, official Eurostat data, based on ISO standards, and peer-reviewed by 3 individual, independent peer reviewers. So what we can do more? I mean, it's not that every industry manipulates the results. We are trying to present our case, present our issues, and certainly every industry wants to be profitable and remains producing in Europe. In our case, we are having in Europe around 660 plants serving local and regional economies, employing 100,000 people. So indeed, it has an economical value and we want to preserve it. Of course, trying to improve always ourselves and on sustainability. And recently, as you are responsible for decarbonization and it's in line with the Green Deal, we have produced our decarbonization roadmap by 2050 with the commitment of the industry to work towards that goal.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to this just a second, just before you do? If you want to send some more questions, we're going to take around questions just a moment, and the hashtag on Slido is packaging, hashtag packaging. Send your questions now and we'll do a run through just after Aurel replies.
Maybe 2 short comments, one about the follow-up measures. So the Commission could not bring forward, and we believe that it would have been a paramount task for any public authority to bring forward the regulatory encyclopedia of packaging and packaging waste by trying to provide ultimate certainty on all the elements in one single silver bullet. This is why, depending on the political orientation which is given by the co-legislators of the European Union, the Parliament and the Council, the Delegated and Implementing Act will follow, and first among all those which are foreseen are those related to criteria for recyclability, formats, design for recycling, and so on. Nobody will be in the dark about this, and this will allow, this sequencing also allows the industry the possibility to adapt over time and to plan. Nobody will be kept in the dark. We will organize public consultations, we will make an impact assessment, and we need the industry and the consumers around the table when the Commission will consult on criteria, on design for recycling, and so on. The second comment is intimately related to these follow-up measures in a way, and to the regulatory philosophy in this area. it's about chemicals. And some have expressed here dissatisfaction and a certain worry that chemicals are not, which are harmful for the consumers and making packaging harder to recycle, are not regulated in detail in this legislative proposal. So it should be. The home of chemicals regulation is a REACH regulation, and we will rely in the future, as we do now, on the Chemicals Agency of the European Union and on the regulatory processes under REACH in order to take the necessary measures which will be applicable for packaging. Where there are restrictions necessary to be complementary and to be packaging specific, but complementary to the regulatory processes under the REACH regulation, we will act in the delegated and implementing acts in order to facilitate the manufacturing of packaging, recycling, and so on. But the home of recycling and the discussion, of the home of chemical regulation should remain REACH. We need this political and intellectual discipline, and we need to keep this contained. And strong essences, as the French say, are kept in separate jars.
Thank you. Okay. First question to Eleni, and it's from Konstantinos Malandrinos. Is there a need to extend recycled content targets to paper packaging as per some amendments tabled in the European Parliament? Plastics is the case as it has low inputs of recycled material uptake.
Yeah, we have indeed made a consultation with our industry because we have assessed the amendments, and what the feedback we had from our industry is that 89 to 90% is, let's say, the limit that they can reach so far. So to go even beyond will be quite difficult, although our industries are trying to find ways to do so. Difficult for the moment is the answer.
Okay, anyone else to add to that? Okay, let's go on. Aurel, you have a bunch of questions here. So, will you please tell us about the content of the JRC study on the reuse targets currently being conducted? Will it only focus on the HoReCa sector, or will it have a broader scope? That's from Emma Kirkby-Teneo.
When it will be ready, we will release it to the public and not keep it in our drawers.
Any idea of what it might look like?
I wouldn't go that far because it would be a slippery road.
Let me encourage you to go down a slippery road then. Okay, let's try another question with you then. So for the impact assessment, so this one comes from Elena Fries-Tersch, and so the impact assessment states that the reuse ratio, a number of times of reuse, is decisive regarding the environmental impact compared to SU plastic or paper packaging. Why does the proposal not include clear provisions on how to monitor and ensure a sufficient reuse ratio by consumers?
I don't have an answer off the cuff on this. We need to reflect. We will reflect on the opportunity to be more specific about this. We have heard some proposals from some industries which are competing with the paper industry, and we thought that this would imbalance things on the market. But we will continue to reflect on this.
Okay. Any other comments on this?
Maybe just a quick reaction is that, of course, there would be merit in having this discussion because there is a risk of creating a gray zone or some single use that is a little bit thicker or it just gets printed, reusable, and then we do end up in a worse position than we are today. So indeed, this is interesting, and it's important that we have reuse systems that do get the breakup point, that do get the rotation that are needed. For transport packaging, I know that also the reuse transport industry is working on this number, and again, they will have to be assessed by the policymakers.
Okay, question from Lance Marshall. What about biodegradable packaging materials or recycling at the waste management plant?
Well, there is a discussion ongoing in the Council, and the Presidency has brought forward something on this. The discussion was not yet conclusive. It's a very fresh discussion, which has started, I think, only at the end of last week. We are reflecting about this. It is important to give a positive signal to a biodegradable and not bioplastics in general. I think I was a little bit confused. On bioplastics, I meant on biodegradable plastics. We have a very rather short list of biodegradable elements, because in general it is considered that, I mean, only a limited number of items should go for biodegradability. Biodegradability entails release of carbons. It's not advantageous to work on this principle on a very large scale.
Okay, thank you. Marco, maybe you'll have a go at this one. How many billions of new pieces of plastic packaging will need to be manufactured, and how many billions of cubic meters of water, you mentioned water earlier, will be used to clean this plastic if we are to meet the PPWD objectives? From David Higgins.
Okay. Thank you very much. So this is it's fascinating to receive these questions, because as European Environmental Bureau, we are working on the revision of packaging rules as part of an alliance that is called Reframe Plastics Alliance. And then looking at the EU packaging rules, we immediately realized the risks of false solutions being promoted. And then the war between packaging materials actually being exploited for this kind of argument. And let me be very clear, I don't consider this argument to be constructive at all. But nevertheless, we can try to have a constructive discussion here. The confusion of these questions also plays in the case of transport packaging. We're talking of reusable transport packaging made of plastics, which operates within a system. And the nature of reuse systems is that they ensure the collection of the packaging at the end of each cycle. So when we evoke images of plastics in the sea, we're not really talking about reuse systems, which are designed to bring back packaging and do ensure higher collection rates, even higher in the case they're already operating in Europe, even higher than the already very high collection rates of single-use paper transport packaging. So we don't see an issue of littering. Actually, reuse systems are a solution to littering. Of course, the business to business because of the nature of the systems, but also the business to consumers. Because in our reuse systems, the reusable packaging will be associated with a deposit, and hence we will be able to significantly improve the collection and address mismanagement of waste and littering.
Thank you. Elena, and then to Stephen as well. You were talking at the bigger scale largely here, but small businesses represent the majority of the manufacturers here. So how are small businesses supposed to adapt to this in any sensible timescale? Elena?
It's very difficult for them. So I'm coming from a Chamber of Commerce, so we represent really a very large scale of businesses from different sectors and from different sides, but mainly SMEs. And what we hear is that they really will have a lot of problems with that. It means a lot of costs for them because you need to collect. If we speak about their use, you need to collect the products. You need to store them somewhere. And of course, you need to transport them somewhere else. So this is a challenge for them, and I think that some of them will actually leave the market because of it.
Some or many?
What we hear, it's many, but let's see.
Okay, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, we want the regulation to be effective. So therefore, we have to understand the difficulties of business transitioning to these, the new regulation, and particularly SMEs. So on the other hand, we can't wait forever. We've got to find that balance, and I think that's something that's got to be discussed in the coming weeks and months. An effective regulation, not a rushed one, but in the end, we want that regulation. But I must just I've been too English, too polite, I think. I must just come back to the Commission and the remark about REACH. REACH is a very good baseline, but it's not enough. It didn't prove to be enough in protecting children from dubious chemicals in the standards for toys. The Commission had to take subsequent Commission decisions to actually exclude those. And it's just the same here. We don't think REACH is enough. It's either got to be in this regulation or it's got to be in the delegated acts. What we don't want to see, and it happened too often with the present directive, we don't want to see these sort of decisions delegated to the private standards bodies, where we have relatively little influence. It's got to be for the regulation. Regulation is what you need to do, standardization, how to do it. It shouldn't be setting the limits.
Okay, just before you respond to that, Aura, we have a question on this from Emily Best, and she said, considering the Ombudsman opened an inquiry into the very concerning, quotation, length of time to introduce REACH restrictions, and that the Commission's proposals on the REACH and FCM reforms are both delayed, why can't the PPWR allow for action on chemicals like PFAS, bisphenols, etc., commonly modelled?
I think, so I certainly agree with, and we agree that this should not be for standardization. This should be where REACH is not sufficient for subsequent delegated or implementing acts, but it won't make a difference if we move everything here. If there is indeed an investigation from the Ombudsman, the criticism is justified. We need to think about what measures can be taken in order to improve the functioning of the system, and this is one of the objectives of the REACH revision that is planned to be brought forward for later this year. But it won't make a difference if we duplicate and if we move the problem in a system where still the role of ECHA will be important and the role of the Commission will be important. So it will be a parallel track with the same actors. Can you run with the same horizontality? Can you run faster on the corridor parallel to you? No, you will run in the same way. So you need to preserve consistency. And where complementary action in substance is necessary, we will act under the regulation.
Okay, slightly lighter question from Maureen Thizon. She says, room service in hotels needs to be considered as takeaway and many proportions packaging allowed, or you'll have coffee without milk, as it should be, and sugar, also as it should be, and burger without tomato sauce. It should be with tomato sauce. Any other views on that? So the Horak Hospitality Europe. So we're talking about the smaller end of the scale. So we're looking at macro things. Small elements like this as well, they add up, and they add up quickly. And you know, as non-milk user, non-sugar user, especially in this country, it comes on my plate every time, and I'm sure goes back into the bin afterwards as well. Do we need to regulate at this level, panel?
So, sorry,
please,
I'm not sure I fully understood the questions, but I want to make maybe a more general point.
Sure.
That when we claim to be supportive of the goals of this regulation, the goals are very clear, is to try and change the direction of the curve of packaging waste generation and reduce packaging waste. And then if actually we start watering down little by little all of the measures, we will have a target. We will have a target that we will never reach, and we all know that. So even if it's at the moment a moderate target of 5% waste reduction, if you start watering down the reuse targets and the bans, which I think where is this question is directive, we are not credible. And we are not allowing member states to do packaging waste prevention. Perhaps one more word on the bans.
Go ahead.
The bans are targeting single-use application, which are widely recognized to be unnecessary and avoidable, for which packaging-less or reusable packaging solutions exist. So we sort of feel this is even lower than the low-hanging fruit. This is sort of the fruit that has already landed in your hand. And we have many member states that are already regulating on this. We really feel maybe now it's time to look at the low-hanging fruit and not at the one that is already there. Picked.
Okay, thank you. Elena, the role of public education in this, where does that sit for you?
Yeah. Definitely it's quite important, and I believe it's a bit neglected because everybody considers the ideal world and the behavior, the normal behavior of citizens should be that they do everything perfectly, and I believe this is neglected, and we take the good behavior as granted, so that everybody will behave as it should. But I wanted to react on what my colleague Mr. Musso said before regarding the question from the participants. You referred to transport packaging, and you referred, the question was about the production of plastic packaging, by the way. And when I spoke in the beginning of my talk on unintended consequences, I was meaning exactly this, that although it's not meant to produce more plastic, the only material that can substitute corrugated packaging in transport is plastic, which means that you will require billions of new plastic packaging flood the market. And something which, of course, is against the objectives of the regulation and against the Green Deal. So we cannot neglect this by no means, and we have to keep in mind that when we talk about reusable packaging, we need to have this in mind. And something which is quite important is end of life. Please consider that whatever the material, packaging material, it will come to an end of life. What comes next? What's the collection? How big is the collection in all member states? How much is recycled? When do you do with the rest? So it's not about reuse is a panacea and will solve all problems. But by listening to Mr. Musso, we believe that if we do reuse packaging, we solve all our problems. We don't have littering in the beaches. We don't have any waste anymore. So I am more moderate, let's say, and I would adhere with the Commission proposal, which is a bit more balanced on it.
Okay, Marco, I guess you want to reply to that?
Yes, please. So if we're talking about transport packaging and we look at the proposal, actually, of course, there's different views on this, but one could say it's a moderate proposal. It's a very low target for 2030, trying to give a chance to reusable packaging in the e-commerce sector. 10%. This is trying to give a chance for reusable packaging in the e-commerce. So when we hear unintended consequences will be flooded of plastics, we do get questions if these arguments are not a bit disingenuous, because reuse systems for transport, again, are part of a systems, which means that the packaging is used multiple times, and of course it has to be used well after the break point from an environmental perspective. So after multiple rotation, the reusable packaging will have environmental performance that are better than single use. And I refer to littering because the nature of a reusable packaging is part of a system for reuse, which is a logistical systems that ensure that at the end of one use, not at the end of its life, at the end of one use is returned, if necessary washed, if necessary repaired and put again in use, makes it very unlikely for it to be littered and to end up, for example, in the environment. So this is why I referred. One of the clear advantages of reusable systems is indeed the prevention of littering and of mismanaged waste. Perhaps something that got lost, but I do repeat it, is that we refer to well-designed reuse systems. And we understand that in this well-designed, there's a lot, and there's a lot of the good discussion that we need to have around this regulation. So indeed, when I say well-designed, is a system that works, and that works to the point where we start having environmental benefits. And that's the point where the environmental benefits are holistic and where the material wars between glass, paper, plastic, metals matters less, because we did reach the point where the overall environmental performance is improved.
Okay, Elena, the idea that design will in large part solve this problem as well, but let's tie this to public education as well. You know, how do we design good public education, and how do companies respond in terms of good design models as well? You know, does this need to come from the Commission? Is this a national approach? Is this a consumer approach? How would you lead with this?
I would come back to the question you asked,
Sure.
the information of consumers. I mean, it's really a task of each of us to sort the waste, to refill and to reuse. We've learned how to sort the waste. I think now it's a second step also to refill and reuse. The plastics are with us since 80 years, I think. Our predecessors lived without them. So maybe we might return to the gestures or habits they had. But the question is, as I said at the beginning, with the economic growth, we consume more and we produce more waste. So we should also think about ourselves, what we want. And sometimes the consumer can make a change, can make a pressure on the producer. So this is, I think, very important.
Do you think the consumer understands the process? So they go into the supermarket, they see the apples. There's no packaging. But they don't appreciate that those apples have been transported halfway around the world, probably. And they've been wrapped in different forms of protective covering. And then somebody in the back of the warehouse brings them out and unpacks them, and then we go into the recycling process. The consumer doesn't think that way, do they? So in terms of public education, what's needed, if it's very unlikely we're going to go back to our previous lifestyles. So how does the consumer start to make those choices when they really don't see the whole process?
You need to educate them.
Okay.
There are different campaigns like buy local food, local products, and you can also do this by supporting zero packaging shops, what we have. So it must be rather like a positive motivation than oblige someone to do something, because sometimes you will not implement it, neither enforce it. So let's do it rather in a positive way. You can also use fiscal schemes that reduce the price. Sometimes
Sure.
the consumers, of course, buy because it's cheaper, and they don't think about, it comes from the other part of the world and it traveled and there is a big carbon footprint. So I think it must be positive motivation and education of consumers.
Stephen?
Well, yes, consumer information is of course important, but let's look at today. I mentioned the survey done for BEOC. That was of ordinary consumers in the street. It wasn't activists who were interviewed. And people are sensitized to the issue of packaging and packaging waste already. The problem is, of course, it's not the consumer who decides the packaging that's used for the product. That's in the hands of the producer. And even though we've had the directive in place since 1994, consumers are sensitized, we are still getting products delivered. I mean, for instance, I bought a particular product the other day. This morning I opened it. It had two plastic containers, each for 4 items. One contained 3, one contained 2, so there were empty spaces in this packaging. But we as consumers can't affect that. It's really in the hands of the producer, and that's why even with consumer information, it's no substitute for legislation.
Lenny?
I would like just to react on what you have said. You mentioned twice that it's in the hands of the producer. It's not in the hands of the producer because the producer has a client who is the retailer who is responsible for the packaging. So the producers of packaging, in fact, have a certain criteria to respect that their client impose them. So, for instance, even if you take all of us, we have experienced an e-commerce delivery, a huge package, and inside a tiny thing. It's not the producer of the package which is to blame because he has an order to produce X packages, for instance, or that size. And the retailer will decide which kind of packaging for probably economies of scale. He may use one certain type of packaging in order to avoid costs, etc. So it's not the producer. The producer has a client, who is the retailer, who asks for the packaging.
I'm happy to say the supplier then.
Okay.
Okay, Ariel wants to respond as well, please.
Yeah, maybe an alternative, and listening to the valid points by the different colleagues who intervene here and who turn the light on the role of different actors, I think we need to have in mind national campaigns which are waged by associations of producers, consumers organizations, and environmental NGOs and public authorities. These are very important, and which should cover awareness about manufacturing, packaging minimization, also selective collection and the labeling and things like this. But there should be a discussion also between manufacturers of packaging and the users. The companies which place products on the markets which require packaging. And this is a, let's say, business-to-business dialogue about compliance with requirements of the regulation. Maybe we need to take a closer look as well and to think about how certain obligations will be really enforced in the future. We'll have this in mind as we still are discussing this legislative proposal.
Else on this?
I can be very quick because I agree with actually most that has been of what has been said. Perhaps I just wanted to make a link with the definition of recycling and all the measures that the proposal puts on recyclability, because we consider that an important aspect for consumers, or rather we can say citizens, is actually to close the gap between theoretical recyclability and then recycling practice and what happens really after they sorted. Because this is a cause of frustration. They do receive a lot of packaging, in some cases more than they would like. But in any case, they are asked to sort it, and without trust that this will actually be recycled. And we know there's a very big gap. A lot of packaging that is theoretically recyclable that is being incinerated or landfilled. So hopefully Article 6 can close this gap, and then it will be way easier to engage citizens because they credibly know that a recyclable packaging is really recycled in practice. We're not there yet, but hopefully the regulation can help.
Thank you. So we have a question from Berto Redondo, essentially to Aurel, but we can put it to the rest of the panel. So the Commission's proposal wants to ban all packaging for fresh fruit and vegetables under 1.5 kilograms. What are the reasons behind this proposal? Has the Commission the data to back up this proposal? And I would add, why not standardize certain types of product much more specifically? For example, except for all the Italians in the room, some of us buy pizzas which are frozen. It happens. And we know that the standardization for these is fairly ridiculous. Some will come with polystyrene base, some will come with corrugated paper base, some are wrapped in plastic, some are just sold in plastic wrapping, others have a box and a box inside. That seems fairly ridiculous. Why can't that be standardized? And where's the data for the 1.5 kilograms?
The data are in the much hated impact assessment, which still contains maybe what is hidden. What is not available to the public is the economic model for reasons related to intellectual property. But otherwise, the data and the scenarios and the combinations of different measures in alternative scenarios are available there, including for this measure. And the logic is very simple. And this is one of the many solutions in this regulation which are actually tested in practice. If you go in a number of shops, the name of which, but these are big chains of shops here in Belgium, I will not advertise them by using their names, you see these solutions in operation without any mandatory rules yet. They operate and they are effective and the consumer is protected. The food waste is averted. And nobody loses from this. So this shows it perfectly works.
Why are they incentivized to do it? Why have they made the decision to do that when it's not required?
Unnecessary packaging. This is avoidable packaging.
But is there a cost benefit to them in that, or is this simply part of their sustainability
Yes,
goal?
it's a cost which is unnecessary and which is thrown on the shoulders of the consumer or in the pockets of the consumer, because this packaging, no matter how thin it is, it costs maybe 2 cents, and which is averted. 2 cents for the customer in Germany, maybe it's not too much. 2 cents for the customer in Romania is more. The customers who earn less, this matters more for them. And the producers do not lose. There are exemptions in the regulation for those fruits which are perishable and more vulnerable, essentially the berries. They can still be wrapped in packaging. But for the apples and the bananas of this world, we see them on a regular basis. They need no packaging.
Okay, does this supply chain conversation happen in your experience, where the supermarket is buying from the farmer, or and the farmers come to you and say, look, we need to save 2 cents on the packaging, how do we work this out? Is that kind of design and consultation process active on a large scale? I'm sure it happens occasionally, but is it a normal thing?
On a large scale, I wouldn't say. Certainly there are discussions between producers and clients of the producers, sure. big supermarkets, etc. We have tried, but for the time being, we were not successful to open the doors of the big supermarkets and big suppliers to discuss with us.
So that's interesting, I think, because the big supermarkets are super price sensitive. and at the same time, they should be able to pass that cost saving on to the consumer. But the consumer has a certain expectation about how they're going to receive their products, right? So, Stephen and Elena in particular, how do you square this? How do we resolve that equation, Stephen?
I think, to quote the MEP, that's difficult. It's a question to which, I have to do that too. It's a question that there isn't an easy answer to, but it's something again that we need to look at in the coming weeks and months. Perhaps we can't solve it, but certainly it's something we need to consider.
Okay, Elena. Same.
Same.
Does the Commission have an opinion? Is it that complex? Would you
The
not
same.
All more tolerant in this than I am.
We are buying time. There are answers which need further reflection and not shooting from the hip, and we will come with solutions later together. It's not the Commission which holds the Holy Grail and the secret of this. We will have to exchange with the industries, but we will try to come with something, with an answer which is practicable and meaningful.
Okay, but shooting from the hip is more fun, you have to admit.
Yes.
The only solution is for pizza, you have to buy it in pizzeria.
I don't object to that policy either. Support your local business. So Jenna Inch also sends a question. This is interesting. What might be some of the potential ramifications on bilateral and or multilateral trade with third countries holding free trade agreements with the European Union if the Commission's proposed regulation comes into effect, and how might these ramifications be mitigated? There's a deep question in there. Aurel.
Yes, in essence, I mean, or as far as I can answer right now, the requirements, and this is what we are communicating already to a number of third countries which are in contact with us, including major producers of packaging. We are telling them, you need to meet the conditions and criteria that are defined by this regulation and by the subsequent implementing acts. You are welcome to participate in the public consultations and in shaping these rules. Participate with facts and figures to the debate. And we have discussed with our colleagues in charge of the customs cooperation. We will mobilize the customs authorities in order to control at the borders as much as possible. And we are mobilizing and we are in contact with our colleagues in charge of single market in DG GROW in order to work in the future, once this regulation is adopted, with the market surveillance authorities, because it will be indispensable that the inspectors in the member states go on a sampling basis in the shops to check the compliance and sanction equally the European manufacturers and the third country and the third countries providers. Actually, the importers will bear the responsibility.
Do we have the enforcement capability for that?
It will be very challenging, and we will see what can be done. It's not a no. It's that it is difficult, but not impossible.
Any further comments on this?
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up on that one,
Sure.
Brian. I think the comment was made, I've heard the comment, I think it was a Euractiv interview with you, which said
Don't do Euractiv. Dangerous.
the directive hasn't been implemented very well by the member states, so what is the point of screwing them harder? I mean, this is going to be the problem. What is going to be the point of the regulation if it's not implemented? What is the expectation of the Commission towards the member states?
Yeah. No, but my message is not that we will let off the hook the surveillance of the market and the member states. We will work with them, yeah? But I'm not saying that this is going to be easy, or that this proposal come in a package with 100,000 more officials across the European Union, which will focus on, or 10,000, which will focus only on the verification of the packaging. So we will have to work on this, but I totally agree, enforcement is important. You wanted to get me
in trouble.
Yes. To hit me up, maybe.
If you have any questions, send them right now. We're running out of time. So one question here for Marco, from Nathalie Lepenec. What does EEB think about the practical case in France? Reusable solutions for e-commerce currently available are based on flexible plastic packaging being shipped back and forth. Flexible plastics need to be chemically recycled, usually with fossil fuel input. Is there a successful reuse model?
So thanks. I am not necessarily an expert of the French case. And the fact that we have limited uptake of reusable in e-commerce is also proven by the incredibly low target that we have to 2030. So it's clear, it seems also clear from the Commission work that that's an area where we are sort of trying to create a regulatory space where innovator in the reusable industry can work on the solutions. What we think why we think it's important to have a reuse target is to give them a chance to innovate and to bring the solution and to prove the case for reuse that works. So I will not comment on the specific application. Okay. Only, of course, you can always find a very problematic single-use packaging application, and the same is absolutely true for reuse systems. We will unfortunately also be able to always point at the worst performance also in the reuse space.
Okay, our last question before we wrap up is from Gaspar van der Wood to Aurel, first of all. In relation to recycled content target, the Council has been discussing swapping recycled content with biomass content. What is the Commission's perspective on this issue?
This is my misunderstanding earlier on when somebody asked about biodegradable. It's a recent proposal. It has its merits. We need to craft it properly in order to basically not dilute the importance of economic importance of recycled content. So if biodegradable plastics get in, we need to raise the level of the targets. But the presidency has put this on the table without consulting with the Commission, but this is not a drama, and I will not complain about this. We need to be kept on our toes. But the member states have not yet, there is no clear majority in favor or against this. So the discussion is ongoing. In principle, it's a promising element, but we need to tailor it well in order not to undermine the effectiveness of certain obligations.
Thank you. Let's do our wrap-up. Let's start with Eleni.
Yeah, so as I said before, reuse and recycling together, hand in hand, to be considered in the packaging and packaging waste regulation. Certainly reuse has its place into the market, but there is no perfect system as described by Mr. Musso. So we need to consider also the reality of the market. Consumer behavior is key as well. And yes, we are at your disposal if you have any question to answer.
Thank you. Stephen.
Well, we certainly need to act. We hear that the growth in packaging waste is outgrowing the growth in GDP. We need it to be implemented. We understand the problems, particularly the SMEs, but we need to work hand in hand to overcome those problems and to find solutions. Ideally, we want the proposal amended by the co-regulators to focus on the prevention of waste. We haven't really talked about that so much, but from our perspective, the proposal looks too much at recycling and reuse. Of course, we want the elimination of hazardous chemicals from the outset, and certainly the elimination of hazardous chemicals from recycled materials. Packaging waste uses resources in its manufacture and causes pollution in its disposal. We need to be rid of it as far as possible. I would usually say we need to consign it to the dustbin of history, but I don't think that's really appropriate when we're talking about waste.
Thank you, Stephen. Marco.
So to conclude that, I would just point at perhaps the lessons that we can learn from what didn't work. As we're now trying to revise these rules to make it work, we should definitely avoid the mistakes that were done in the past. So I will try to be very quick on this. One is ignoring upstream and only focusing on marginal improvements of collection and recycling as proven not to work, to continue would not work again. And the second bit is the enforceability. It has been referred to. This directive was not easy to implement. It was not enforced in practice. We need this to change. And so the focus and the debate should also be on the enforceability. What doesn't help implementation and enforcement is to carve out all kind of derogation of exceptions, because this does complicate it. And unfortunately, we see already that this is the case. And we would really urge the decision makers to not add further exemptions and further derogation. And then the final point will be really about the timing. And it will be easy to characterize NGO positions as dreamy and rushed. We're not dreamy. We don't want a rush process, but we're convinced that it's high time to revise the EU packaging rules, which everybody agrees that don't work. So the last point is, don't waste time. We would really urge decision makers to conclude the work before the European elections. And on this, I think industry, certainly consumers, and everybody agrees. So let's not postpone it and deal with the packaging waste crisis now.
Thank you, Marco. Elena.
So to wrap up, the way how to reuse the waste must be decided by the member states. Everyone has to take his or her responsibility in this task, so it should not be put only on the shoulders of businesses. The businesses need certainty and predictability, so Commission, please avoid the trial and error method, and the consumer's health should prevail over the environmental issues.
Thank you. Aurel, 30 seconds.
Yeah, so we need to change something radically in the light of the trends that we noticed over the past 10-15 years, and the time of change, indeed, it's now. It's the end of extensive developments and the extensive use of resources in the area. We need to think about intensive methods, to put it in a very short way. And there will be some businesses which will be forced to abandon expansive approaches. I think they should engage in the process. We need a regulation, and we need a regulation which has a single market legal basis and which does not allow for too many exemptions. And this is a message also for the member states, for those who think that we should tailor all kinds of derogations, allowing them to come forward with higher targets, with more ambitious measures, with more ambitious requirements. This will refragment the single market. If we want to draw the economic and environmental benefits of the scale of this market and to satisfy the consumers, we need to keep this compact. And the legislative proposal strikes a fair balance around between a range of measures which address the entire life cycle of packaging. Keep it like this. Some fine-tuning is possible, but let's keep the balance of the overall package.
Thank you, Aurel. And thank you to our studio audience, our online audience, for their great participation, all the questions in today. Thank you to our excellent panel, a really thorough discussion, and I appreciate being able to take all the questions so well today. And to FEFCO for their support for the program, thank you. But also to the Euractiv team that work behind the scenes. You don't see them. We have Malta, Zoran, and Wilson in the studio. Behind me, production with Bonya, and Tamara and Anna and the events team, but also thanks to the social media team. So that's our discussion on packaging all wrapped up. I wish you a good afternoon. I'm Brian Maguire.